Welcome back. For the next couple segments, we're going to be discussing the legal stories that are in the news, including, of course, the growing police reform movement, lawsuits stemming from COVID, and more. Let's start by introducing our panel via Zoom. Starting at the top, Jim Kousouros, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Associations, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. And he's taking maritime law to a new height here as he's joining us from the high seas. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And he's joining us from terra firma on land. Okay, at the top of the show, guys, we showed our audience how lawmakers in D.C. are trying to reform policing, and we also spoke with a retired NYPD detective to get the police perspective. Now, let's speak with officers of the court, attorneys, and how they view the things here. And I should mention, while both are defense attorneys, they were also both former prosecutors. So let's start off in New York, where Governor Cuomo announced sweeping reforms Friday.
This is systemic reform of police departments. This is sitting down and taking a look at exactly what they do and have been doing and looking at it through a new lens of reform and reinvention, because this has been 40, 50 years in the making.
Well, those changes involve banning chokeholds, repealing a decades-old law that keeps police disciplinary records secret, and that's happening as we're witnessing a sea change in the way that things are done in many places, including, obviously, the Empire State. Now, I'm going to quote from a piece in the Times that does a good job of explaining the moving pieces here. As thousands have taken to the streets in New York, the city's prosecutors have taken an increasingly liberal stance on issues of policing. Prosecutors went so far last week as to support the legislature's decision to make chokeholds a crime and to repeal a law that kept police misconduct records secret, a forceful disavowal of the status quo, which largely protected abusive officers. On top of that, Manhattan DA has not been prosecuting many of the people arrested during the protest, including a person accused of helping two other people deface St. Patrick's Cathedral with graffiti. The other two suspects still at large. Okay. What I'd like to do, and may I start with you, is I'm going to give you some of the pushback that I've been hearing from members of law enforcement. And let's just assume they're not just blanket apologists for all cops. They're saying, listen, you just have to make an allegation against the cop. It doesn't have to be proven in any way, shape, or form. And if you're looking at somebody's jacket, an allegation, you're almost guilty with even a chance to disprove. Moreover, they're saying that if you go to such a degree to demonize police here, you're going to create a more dangerous environment there in the field and also disincentivize police from trying to enforce the law because they're afraid of consequences. How do you respond to the concerns from law enforcement that this is going to go too far and it'll have the counter result that people want, which is less law and order?
Well, Governor Cuomo probably put it best. He says it's been 40 or 50 years coming. There's no reason for it to have been 40 or 50 years coming. We've had these cases for hundreds of years, and nothing's been done. Some of the same prosecutors who are now supporting these changes were the major obstacles to these changes. We had presented bills that call for exactly this 20 years ago, and they've had cases exactly like this 20 years ago. For the officers or anybody else in the public who thinks that all you have to do is make an allegation, well, that's absolutely incorrect, because without video, without the witnesses, if the witnesses don't bear out the allegation, then the officers really should be all right. Unfortunately, it's far easier for an officer to make up an allegation about a member of the community and claim there is no video, there are no witnesses, they don't have a body camera on, and then it's that officer's word against the word of the civilian, and far more often than not, that person will lose. So I think that the objective should be to seek fair justice for police and for people in the community. And as we actually implement more body cameras being worn and making that standard procedure, it makes it far more likely we're going to get the right result.
Jimmy, as I said at the top, you used to work with law enforcement when you were prosecuting cases in the city before you joined the defense efforts. To that end, if you were at your old job right now, Is there more of an us and them potentially with what's being chosen to prosecute and the more willingness to prosecute cops seemingly than we've had in the past? Is that a legitimate worry on the part of cops or not?
Look, it's a legitimate worry from everybody's perspective, Rich. And this is what happens when things get so politicized that you have the politicians and DAs reacting in a way to appease their constituency instead of just looking at the facts and just taking an incremental approach. What Governor Cuomo said, it bothered me tremendously, and Mayo commented on it. It's 50 years in the making. Really? It took 50 years of what you were looking at to do something about it? The only reason anybody is doing anything, and perhaps going a little bit too much to one side, is because they're all scared that they're going to lose their jobs. And that is what is so aggravating. Rich, there's going to be a tremendous backlash from law enforcement. You're going to start hearing things like, something, if that's going to be the situation, we're not going to respond. If that's going to be the situation, we're not going to put ourselves in a position where there's going to be an allegation. There's going to be backlash from both sides. You're going to have prosecutors now who are charging without making the appropriate analysis because they're afraid if they don't, they'll get a backlash.
Jimmy, let me ask you, because you saw the video out of Atlanta.
Right.
Now, Minnesota's easy, I think,
Absolutely.
because the guy's a monster, okay? And nobody
Absolutely.
thought that was just fun. But I think about the amount of cases that I've sat down at a table with you guys and Doug, when I saw far more egregious and mind-bending videos of police abuse than what I saw, which was a tragedy in Atlanta, and maybe the officer who drew his gun should have been prosecuted. But I was surprised to see felony murder for that carries potentially a life prison, if not even death penalty in Georgia, compared to the other kind of cases I've seen. At least in that one, he was responding to the guy drawing a taser on him. I'm not saying the outcome was right, but I'm saying it's hard for me to understand where the line is anymore. Maybe it's because so little has been done in the past, but still it seems to be a moving target, pardon the bad pun.
That's pretty much what I'm saying, Rich. I agree with you. Look, the Atlanta situation is devastating and heartbreaking, but it is different. And I was surprised to see felony murder charges in this situation because while, again, perhaps certain charges are warranted, we don't have all of the evidence and what the prosecutor has in front of them. I was surprised to see a felony murder charge, and that is what I mean by perhaps you're going to have situations where there's overcharging. What we've talked about on this show month after month after month, instead of perhaps firing everybody and so on and so forth, what Mayo has talked about needs to be done. This was one of those perfect moments that Mayo has talked about over the years where appropriate training and de-escalation, as opposed to the officer drawing that weapon and firing that weapon, was what needed to happen. We need training. We need to cleanse our police departments, make sure the people we have there are there for the right reasons, and then are properly trained to do their job.
Hey, Mayo, it depends if half full or half empty, but I think that we're going to see, there'll be a minimum floor, but there will be, I think, tangible change. Maybe it's because of politics, whatever the reason, there'll be changes in policing when this is done in Washington. Conversely, I saw last night that special on ABC, which took us back into the years leading up to the LA riots and the LA riots themselves. And the haunting, familiar stories with different players, different time zones, different years, but it feels like there could be a tinderbox. Just one more thing goes off here. It could be also, are you optimistic or pessimistic what the next year will bring here, at least as a national dialogue and an overdue one? What do you think?
I'm somewhat optimistic because for the first time in quite some time, there's actually going to be structural change. Normally, you have speeches given, you have people going out and meeting with community leaders, which is wonderful. That should always occur, but it's not a substitute for having actual legislation which says that as a police officer, for instance, you are a mandatory first responder, as a teacher would be, as a nurse would be, so that if you see something, as the police are so fond of telling us, if you see something, say something. Well, if you as a police officer see misconduct, you have a duty to respond, a duty to prevent it where possible. And you're not always going to be able to do it. Each case is going to ultimately stand on its own merit. But the fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that we have so many people of so many different walks of life, and you have people in Utah, which is a red state and overwhelmingly white, who are also voicing the same concerns, to me gives me optimism that we're going to have real change. But it also tells me that the problems we're facing are systemic and pervasive.
When we come back, the law in the age of COVID, more and more businesses are telling people they got to sign waivers to shield companies from lawsuits if customers get sick. The question is, are those going to hold up in court if people start suing? We'll discuss with the table after this.